Will and Michelle, are you all set now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think I have to leave. I have to stay though, right? Or keep it open?
I don't think so. I think if you leave, it'll ask you to rename like a host. So I think you can rename me if you'd like as a host.
I think, Joy, I think you asked me to be host and I'm going to share my slides, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Joy, for
Yeah,
saving
no
the day.
Oh, no problem.
So should I just go ahead and share my slides now, or I don't know, were you going to start, or how do you want to run this?
Sorry, I was supposed to be somewhere else, but I wanted to make sure everything was going okay. So yeah, I think if we want, Michelle could start with the introduction and let the attendees in, and we can have you start sharing your slides.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. I'll go ahead with the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Clinical Trials Methodology course webinar series. My name is Michelle Minix, and I'm an administrative assistant helping today with the course, and I'm glad that you could join us. Before we get to the presentation, I want to remind you of a few things. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat box or the Q&A features at the bottom of your screen. Also, please complete the evaluation for today's webinar so that we can improve future webinars, and I'll put the link in the chat box for everybody. Also, in partnership with the AAN, we provide one CME for this webinar, and you can indicate your desire for CME in the evaluation. And lastly, our next webinar is August 23rd, and it is on rare disease trials with children, adults, or both. And today's webinar is on trial management, presented by Marianne Kearney Chase. Marianne is the Director of Research Operations in the Neurological Clinical Research Institute at Massachusetts General Hospital. And we want to thank Marianne for her time and presentation today.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome.
I'll go ahead and share my slides. I think everybody can see these. Put them in slideshow mode. Okay, so as Michelle said, I'm gonna present to you today a little bit on trial management. And I don't think I can see who's on, but I'm not sure where everyone is. So I tried to make this a somewhat general presentation. I don't think it's really started doing full screen for some reason. Okay, we'll get a preview of all my slides since I can't get this into presenter mode. So first off, I'll just say that I have no disclosures to report. The agenda for today's presentation is I'm going to, let's see, great. I'm going to talk a little bit about regulations. I always sort of start off many presentations talking about regulations and how we get to our good clinical practice guidelines, because that's sort of at the basis of all trial management. I'm next going to talk to you a little bit about how to build a team and really like in many areas of life, it always takes a village in building a team and managing a clinical trial. And then I'm going to really split the presentation into two different examples. One is managing a clinical trial site operation. So really when you're being a site investigator in a multicenter study. And then I'll talk a little bit about managing multicenter clinical trials and sort of the clinical trial operations when you're acting as the sponsor or a sponsor investigator. Okay. Slides are advancing. Okay, great. So first I want to talk about regulations. As I said, there are a lot of regulations, right? So there are regulations within the US. These are primarily from the FDA, but also the Health and Human Services, the Code of Federal Regulations, as I'm sure you all know about. They really inform what we have our good clinical practice guidelines, as do the ICH guidelines. And these are the International Conference on Harmonization. And they also really inform what we call good clinical practice guidelines. So why do we regulate clinical trials? Primarily, the most important guiding principle is that we want to ensure the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects. are always protected. So anyone who's participating in research. We also want to provide useful scientific data to improve or change our standard of care. So we're always trying to improve standard of care. So really the regulations have those two key principles that guide them, making sure that the participants that participate are safe and that their rights are well protected, and that we end up with good quality data so that we can truly improve the quality of our standard of care. So good clinical practice guidelines, these are a standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials. These are principles again and guidelines that help us to ensure that the data is of really good quality, right? So it's credible and accurate. And again, that the rights of everyone that's participating are protected. The International Conference on Harmonization has a comprehensive guideline that we often use to guide all of our research. There are 8 sections in this guideline. The first is a glossary of terms, which seems to really start out pretty basic, but it's really important to understand what we mean by different terminology. So I'm going to go over a couple of the terms here. They then go through all of the key principles of good clinical practice. Then they talk about the requirements for an IRB or an ethics committee, for investigators who are enrolling participants in the trial, for sponsors who are overseeing it at a larger level and working with sort of the regulators. It also lists the general requirements and the minimum requirements really for what needs to be included in a clinical trial protocol, as well as amendments. And it also gives guidance to the sponsors about creating an investigator's brochure to really inform the investigators of all of the activities and findings from any of the studies that have gone on with that drug previous. And then it gives guidance on regulatory documentation and what's required, again, to ensure that the data that's collected is valid and accurate for regulators to review, ultimately to get new drugs approved. So again, I'm just going to start off with some pretty basic definitions here. A sponsor is defined by the ICH-GCP as an individual, company, institution, or organization that takes the responsibility for initiating, management, and/or financing a clinical trial. So the sponsor really has the overall objective of thinking about the entire study, so reaching the objectives of the study. And they have reporting responsibility to the FDA or other regulators, as well as the IRB, whether it be a central IRB or all the local IRBs that are involved. An investigator is defined as a person who's responsible for the conduct of the trial at a specific trial site. Their focus is really on the individual participants that they are recruiting and enrolling into the study, and for implementing that protocol as it's written. They have responsibility for reporting information to their IRB, whether it be a local IRB again or a central IRB, and they also have reporting requirements to the sponsor. There are other responsibilities here of sponsor investigators. There's another definition. And this is where many of you may want to go with your career, is to be an individual who both initiates the trial as well as one who is also treating participants, right? So you're overseeing the clinical trial, you're designing the clinical trial, but you're also planning on treating patients. You have to be aware that from a regulatory standpoint, your obligations are both that of the sponsor. So if you read the ICH guideline, there are specific responsibilities for a sponsor, but you are also responsible for all of those listed in the section that goes over the investigator responsibilities. And I can just tell you from working with many sponsor investigators, wearing both hats can be challenging. Sometimes an investigator sees an individual participant and they think they should be eligible for the study. They just don't quite meet eligibility. As the sponsor, you have to put on a different hat to say, I've defined my patient population and who I'm testing this drug in. So you have to think about it not at the patient level, you have to think about it at the overall study and what is the objective of the trial. So wearing both hats and knowing whether you're having your hat on as the investigator or the sponsor can be quite challenging. So, from an academic standpoint, you're going to hear the word sponsor many times as well. So when you talk about sponsor from a regulatory standpoint, this really is the person who submits the investigational new drug application to the FDA. It's the person who designs and initiates and conducts a study. The financial sponsor is often the funding source. And from an NIH standpoint, they often fund, as you know, trials. Sometimes there are industry collaborators, foundations, other small pilot grants that you can get as well. And those often are referred to as financial sponsors. And I also just wanted to define the term of a coordinating center. So typically in an academic setting, there is a team that assists the overall academic PI to make sure that they can fulfill all of their regulatory requirements in managing a study. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how you build that coordination center, how you build your team in today's presentation. So before I get too into the team building, I just wanted to give everybody a good sense, and I know you're taking this course, so you're all pretty well aware of the clinical trial process, but to just think about all the many steps that have to happen, really from study design, thinking about what is your question and really defining your study, coming up with a synopsis, coming up with your study documents. If you're going to do a multi-center study, thinking about who else is going to be involved in that, whether it be multiple institutions or multiple people within your institution, thinking about from an ethics standpoint or an IRB standpoint, how you need to do the application, who's going to serve as the IRB of record for your study, getting that approval letter from the IRB and potentially the FDA if it's an FDA regulated study, then training everyone on the trial at either an investigator meeting or some type of a site initiation meeting. That all needs to occur before you can enroll any participants. As you're enrolling and recruiting participants into a trial, there are monitors that need to look at that data managers who need to manage that data to ensure it's consistent. And all of that needs to happen before you can have your statisticians review and lock that data in order to have a final report to really answer your question. So, this whole process, as you know, is a bit daunting. And this just really shows, I'm not going to go through this diagram in detail, but it's one of these, sort of comedic things, but it really does show that it takes a village. There are many different steps and roller coasters and pitfalls along the way as you're going to try to manage a trial. So what you want to do is really create a good team. You want to have a team around you that really can fill in and provide the guidance that you need. So what is a team? Just the definition of a regular team is really a group of people who are interacting independently and they share responsibility to achieve a common goal through effective communication. Not every group of people, as you all know, that meet regularly is really considered a team. We try to really create high-performing teams, and some of the key features of having a high-performing team are people who are, really engaged in the goal. They have a clear goal that can engage them. They have clear expectations and performance measures that they can meet. They produce high-quality output, so a really good protocol, consent form, all these things that you need your team to help you produce. The team itself promotes growth from within all team members, so giving people the opportunity to cross-train and to learn from one another and from others. And really the team itself benefits because the team itself can actually learn and grow as one unit and really have success and be a high-performing team. So how do you develop your workforce? And this is something that I think everybody really needs to think about regardless of what stage of your career you're at. So oftentimes early in careers, PIs may start off with a small in-house study. Maybe it's done with departmental funds or some small pilot funding, and you have some pilot data to really think about what is a larger question you want to ask. So sometimes when you're there, you need a specific small team. There are, the next step might be that someone is a site investigator in a multi-center study. You need a team to support you in that endeavor as well. And then a larger step is also one when a PI starts as, overseeing a multi-center study. Again, you have almost that sponsor or sponsor investigator role. You need a workforce that's able to expand with as your career expands and your portfolio expands. So, how do you find the right people? How do you build that team? We get asked that question all the time. So we really try to split people into kind of 3 groups, right? So there are people who are, you really need to consult with about the science. You need to get investigators yourself, as well as any co-investigators, other people in the field, experts in the field, biostatisticians. If there are companies that are developing drugs in this area, you want to have conversations with all of those people, and some of them may also be on your team. For regulations and operations, again, these are people that you need on your team. Some of them you just need to consult with and get advice from. Other ones will be more permanent team members, but you're looking for people with experience in regulations, both from an IRB perspective, an FDA perspective. If you're getting NIH funding, someone who has NIH experience, particularly in the grants and accounting area. For operations, you need, really good coordinators and project managers and data managers and people who are going to build an electronic data capture system, and people who can oversee and monitor data as well. So again, when you're building this team, again, this is just another silly cartoon to throw in here. But it's you really have to remember is that everyone comes with their own perspective. So this perspective is really about, sort of different people's perspective on research in general. And what you see in the middle is a glass that has some liquid in it. Some people see the glass as half full. Some people see the glass as half empty. Some people see the glass as a vulnerable population. Some people want to amend the glass. So there's lots of different perspectives. So when you're building your team, you really need to recognize that people are coming with different perspectives, and you as the leader of that team really need to take into consideration different people's perspectives and also broaden their perspectives so they do see the wider picture, that it really is a cup with some water in it. So if you're a team of 1, and many investigators start off as a team of 1, what you first want to do is really define your personal research strategy. So how are you going to approach whatever study it is that you are proposing or that you're working towards? Part of doing that is learning from those around you. So we're already doing that clearly through this course, and probably your own institutions as well. So meeting with others at your institution who are in the same field or even in different fields, right? So different groups, oncology may have a different group of people. Again, different disciplines have pools of coordinators or ways that they organize and manage trials. So learn about that. Learn if there is a coordinator pool at your institution that you might be able to tap into for a smaller study if you can't afford to, you don't have funding to support a full-time coordinator, for instance. Be creative in thinking about this and working with your colleagues. Also identify the resources within your institution. So there are many institutions that have a CTSA, they have other research infrastructure, they have physicians who are doing research already, who want to be mentors to more junior faculty. So just making sure that you reach out and understand, especially when you're a team of 1 and you're starting out. When your team grows to 2 or 3, I would say the most important person, and if you don't know this already, you should, the most important person you'll always hire is your coordinator. I always say, the person that is either your coordinator or your project manager needs to be someone you like. It needs to be someone you are going to work well with and communicate well with. You need to provide them with access to all of the information so that they can have all of the information to be able to help you. So I think the coordinator has to be able to attend meetings, represent you at these different opportunities that occur. So whether it be an IRB meeting or professional meetings or an investigator meeting, give them those opportunities so they can learn and grow, broaden their own perspective. Sometimes we lose our coordinators and our project managers because they find other opportunities either within the institution or outside. You want to be known as an investigator who promotes that instead of holding people back. So just really, as your team begins to grow, your coordinator is the most important person that you'll hire, and you want to make sure you have someone good who will stick with you for a little bit. The other people, it really does depend on your study, who else you need. So these are the types of individuals who you might need on your team as your projects grow. People with protocol expertise and, who understand procedures, the actual procedures that are going to be done in your protocol. If you're doing an interventional study, drug delivery, pharmacy people, laboratory procedures, you need lab people, whether you're doing central labs or local labs. You need someone on the regulatory side, again, from an IRB perspective or an FDA perspective, depending again on your responsibilities. Someone who can help you with safety management, both identifying and reporting of safety events. You need someone to help with finances on many different levels. We'll talk a little bit about that. And people who do data entry, again, if you are the site investigator, someone who's going to do your data entry, and those who do data analysis, which biostatisticians and the clinicians work on that together. So, what types of people fit into these roles? And I really just outlined here sort of who the people are that will be on your study team. And those who may be able to provide the expertise that we just talked about, right? So protocol expertise, it's really your investigators and your biostatisticians and project managers and coordinators as well. These are people who have done protocols before. They know some of those pitfalls that you may fall into if you try to pack too many procedures, for instance, for procedures and adherence. If you try to pack too many procedures into one visit, and they realize the visit's a 12-hour visit, that's really not going to be feasible to conduct. There are really important people, and again, depending on who is what your study is, you want to pick out people that you can count on to provide you with this advice, and then really listen to them as they provide advice. So the next portion of the presentation is really about how you manage site operations. So if you were asked by a company or another academic physician to participate as a site investigator in a multi-center study, just going to give you again just that overall definition again of the site investigator. This is really the person who's involved with recruiting individual participants to participate in the study, and also for implementing the protocol at their institution. And they have reporting responsibilities to the IRB and the sponsor. So at an investigator level, the first thing you want to do is think about, do you want to participate in the study? You need to know do you have the resources, and what is the protocol? Really read that protocol and investigator brochure and make sure that you are interested in participating in that study before you decide to. You need to also oversee and understand the budget and the contracting responsibilities. You may have a grant administrator who's working on most of that for you, but you as the investigator need to also provide oversight there. You need to understand sort of what organization your site will need. How many people would you need? Do you need people that can perform different outcome measures? Are they certified for that? What type of training do they need? You need to have an understanding about IRB approval. So are you going to be using your local IRB? Will there be a central IRB involved? And again, what other responsibilities do you have there? So this is really, as you say you want to participate in something, understanding what your responsibilities are for the beginning portion. As we move into a study, you have to be able to, recruit the participants. You have to know you have a patient population that would be eligible for the trial. You are going to be responsible in an ongoing way for making sure that you train and supervise your staff who's working on this, for collecting all of the data and participating in monitoring visits as the monitors come out and review that data that you've been collecting. You're also responsible for any IRB reporting, again, whether it be local or central, and communicating directly with the sponsor about those things. For closeout responsibilities, again, you're responsible for reviewing all of that final data that's been collected and cleaned and monitored, and ensuring that it's accurate before you sign off on that, and also working with the IRB, again, whether it be local or central, to close out your site. So these are all the responsibilities you would be taking on as a site investigator. So what makes a good site investigator? Again, a question that comes up, very frequently. It's not the investigator themselves. They don't have to understand everything. The most important thing is to actually understand where your deficits are. So you may not know anything about your investigational pharmacy. You may not know anything about regulations to do with the FDA. So what you want to do is you need to have staff, you need to have your team that fills in and actually complements your skill set. So it's really important for you to have a staff that can give you the full comprehensive skill set that is needed to conduct that study. You as the investigator, you have to have enough interest to really want to enroll participants in the study. Because if the investigator and the coordinator are not motivated and not interested in the study, then there really is no reason to participate, and your enrollment won't be high, and your data quality likely won't be high. So it's important to think about that. You have to, again, have access to an adequate patient population. When a pharmaceutical company is looking at your site to determine whether or not they will choose you as a site, they often look at what was the success rate in the past at your institution with finding these participants and following the protocol and doing, submission of data in a timely fashion. So those are some of the things that companies and sponsors look for to help them define what is a good site investigator. When you review the protocol and the budgets, you need to look at, again, we talk about, you have to have equipoise, right? You have to be sure that if you're going to be enrolling participants, you feel like all of the study treatments, are ethically and clinically acceptable for that patient population. So you have to really understand and believe in the protocol. You have to be able to prepare documents for the IRB and answer any follow-up questions that might come back. And also, you need to really understand the financial aspects here. You need to understand what is happening when you're going to be participating. What are the financial pieces of that? When will the sponsor be making payments to you, so that you know how you're going to pay your staff and pay your institution as well. So the number one rule for a site investigator is to have a really experienced coordinator. If you can't have an experienced coordinator, find a mentor for your coordinator, just like you're finding a mentor for yourself. Find a mentor who is more experienced at your institution that your coordinator can reach out to, and always arrange for a backup. It's oftentimes hard to have a backup, especially from a funding situation. But you have to remember your coordinator will take time off, will get sick, things will happen. So making sure that you have someone that can follow up once you've enrolled participants as well. It's important to have a backup for that study coordinator. So some of the things that you need to do as you are setting up your site is hire appropriate personnel. We've already talked about that. It will differ whether you're talking about an observational study or an interventional study, whether or not there are procedures. So if drug administration is an intravenous drug administration, you're going to need different staff potentially than if it's a non-interventional study where the follow-up can be done via telemedicine through questionnaires. So you'll need different staffing. So you really have to look at the protocol to determine what level of staffing you need. Same thing for regulatory and billing. You need to have adequate space, both for equipment that might be required for the study. If there's certain equipment that is needed for an outcome measure. You also need space for your monitors to come and sit and review the data. You need space for paper documents. So most of our clinical research is still done on paper documents. So making sure that you have adequate space for all of that. And again, from a financial standpoint, it's so important to really ensure that your budget that you negotiate is going to cover all of your site costs. You need to have a clear understanding of what can be billed to the patient's insurance. So what is standard of care and what gets billed to the study budget. And again, how often your sponsor will be paying. Do they pay on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis? That's a really important thing for you as you're starting up your study, to have a clear understanding of, and have your grant administration and financial person have a clear understanding as well. And oftentimes, again, if you're working with an interventional study, you need a pharmacy involved, and sometimes you need your laboratory involved. So it's important to build those relationships as you're starting up and engage those personnel from the different groups that you need. As you recruit, you really have to think about recruitment right from the start. It really does oftentimes come down to a local effort. If you're recruiting from your own practice, make sure that you have a clear understanding, that you have approval to go to your local patients. Make sure that you know who might be eligible or not. Thinking about if you're going to be recruiting across different disciplines or from referring physicians, how might you educate them, motivate them, explain the study to them, meet with them on a frequent basis. So that's something that you should really be thinking about again and budgeting for. That's why you want to think about this up front. You want to budget for it and hire appropriately to be able to have people that can do this and go out to the local community. So again, recruitment really starts before you're starting your study. As an investigator, you have to remember that really the buck does stop with you. The site investigator, again, while you can delegate specific tasks to your staff, you are ultimately responsible. So you're not expected to understand all of it. So the complexities of the grant management system, maybe that your institution uses. However, you need to have a basic understanding and make sure that you have hired and are supervising people in a way that they will keep all of those records and keep everything on track as needed. You also need to have really good communication skills. I think this is one of the key things as an investigator is making sure that you hire the right people and that you communicate really well with them. Because I think when you have mutual respect and a collaborative spirit, that's when a clinical trial site really excels. I put this slide here and I will say, I know it's way too small to read, but I just want you all to be aware when you are signing on as a site investigator, you will be asked to sign this FDA Form 1572. If this is a study that's being regulated by the FDA. You want to read this before you sign it. It's a very important document. You don't just sign it without reading. I could have highlighted a lot of things here, but I didn't want to spend too much time on the 1572. I did just underline one word, and that is in the second bullet there, which says, I agree to personally conduct or supervise the described investigation. So again, really understanding that it is you personally. You can't say, well, I delegated that, so it's not my fault that something went wrong. You're supposed to oversee and supervise everything that you delegate to anyone that you hire or that you have on your staff conducting the study. So really important to read the 1572 and to be assured that you can do this. It can be a little bit daunting as long as you have a good staff and a good team to support you. So next, I'm going to go into the how to manage a multi-center study. And when we think about conducting a trial, what do you need to be able to be successful here? And again, it all comes down to teamwork. So again, just to remind you of what the definitions were here. So a sponsor, again, the sponsor is the person who takes responsibility. That's usually a company, typically. Could be a physician, could be an individual, but they focus on the overall study objectives, not on the individual participants. And their responsibility is to reporting to the FDA as well as to the IRB, whether it be central or local. A sponsor investigator is, again, someone who both initiates, so puts the original IND application into FDA, but also sees participants and has the responsibility of treating patients. Wearing both those hats, as I said earlier, is really challenging because you are under the obligation, if you get audited by the FDA, you have the obligations of both the sponsor, so all of the regulations that have to do with sponsor responsibilities, and then on top of that, all of the responsibilities of being an investigator. So it can be quite challenging. So typically we break down the stages of a clinical trial when we think about being a sponsor. Into 4 different categories. And again, you need different things in each one of these. So the first one being the project concept. So this is when you're really writing your synopsis, you're really working with all of the experts to really hone your question and what you want to do. You're developing your schedule of activities, thinking about, how are you going to conduct your study? What procedures would need to be done in order to get the data to answer the question. You're also hoping at this stage typically ends with getting a grant award, getting funding to move forward with this. And we also we typically engage a steering committee during this time. Again, the steering committee are those people that are really helping you to hone that question. Then we have the startup period. During this is high activity for your study team, writing the full protocol, selecting your sites, managing contracts and drugs and vendors and IRB approvals, writing up all of your plans, and ultimately having things well in hand so that you can have an investigator meeting to train your sites on how to conduct the study. Then we have first patient visit to last patient visit. So this is the time when patients are being enrolled in the study and then also followed. So retaining those patients through the length of the study, the follow-up period. It has to do with safety monitoring, study monitoring, drug supply, ongoing training of your sites, staff turnover at sites, managing of data, managing of paying, making sure that you're paying both your sites and your vendors, and communicating with your sites. We have newsletters on here because it's, we want to have ongoing communication as well during this period. And then the final period is really close out. This is when all of the data, the final data queries are going in, you're working towards database lock, analyzing that data, and producing your manuscript, coming up with an answer to your question. So during all this, as you can imagine, you have a team of people that are really important. We call that team, the core project team or the overall project team. And then they have lots of people that they work with as well. So the core project team that we usually have involved from day one, and we would recommend are, again, people that are primarily on your steering committee, right? So it's investigators, co-investigators, statisticians, a patient advocate. It's really important to have a patient advocate involved here. They provide, really invaluable input into the protocol and what's doable and what the true question is that is important to patients. A research coordinator who's done this before, who has implemented protocols before, a project manager, a data manager, someone who's going to put together your case report forms or the way that you're going to capture the data is needed for your trial. Someone who's going to oversee safety, making sure that we're always keeping an eye towards safety and safety management. Your grants and contracts manager, this is probably the person who's going to be putting in for your award, requesting funding from all the different agencies. And study monitors as well. They have a lot of insight before a study begins as to the best way to write a protocol and to conduct a study. So we always try to involve our study monitors as well. The glue that really keeps this team together is a well-written protocol. So this team is really producing all of the materials once you get that funding, right? So you want to have good written, really well-written material so that you can train everyone. You want to have a well-designed electronic data capture system so that, again, when you get the data, it's easy for the biostatisticians to analyze it because all of the key data is there. A really well thought out safety management plan, again, looking at what is the safety profile if this is a drug that you're testing. Standard operating procedures, so everybody understands the way that things should be operating on the entire team. The team should be meeting regularly, and obviously you need adequate funding for this team to continue to meet regularly and to produce all of these great materials. The core project team also puts together what we hope are realistic timelines, really for all phases of the study, and they also are tracking that timeline and tracking the milestones and can make you aware if there are any of those milestones that are at risk because of some activities that are taking longer than expected. So the core team, the real function here is thinking about the overall operational conduct of the study from the very beginning of the study when it's just in the design phase all the way to database lock and report or publication finalization. Remembering that you as the PI are responsible, to make sure that your study that you've put in a grant application for example, is conducted, that it meets all of its milestones, and it does so within the budget period. So it does so both on time and on budget. And you can't be an expert at everything. So again, it's really important to have the study team that helps you and can project when there are hurdles ahead, because there are always hurdles ahead. So it's key to budget for your project team, and it's also key for you to really listen and have those key individuals that you can listen to along the way. The different pieces that they're working on. So who's best really to read a protocol with the focus of what data needs to be collected. You need many eyes on these documents in order for them to be well developed. You need the IT people there to tell you what's feasible or not feasible. You need your study monitors who are going to be monitoring that data, project managers, data managers, statisticians, because again, they're looking at the endpoints at the end. Again, I just tried to add in here, when we're evaluating a protocol to see if it's patient friendly, there are research coordinators, experienced research coordinators will definitely know what's a patient friendly protocol or not, or procedures. Same thing with the patient advocates and the study monitors and project managers. Again, from a safety perspective, we want to look at the informed consent form. So someone on your safety team will be key there. Again, a patient advocate, because they're the ones that understand, patient's point of view as they're reading a consent form. So it's really important to have multiple eyes on your documents. From a regulatory perspective, you need to really identify sort of who are the regulators that are going to be involved in your study and who can help you to liaise, who on your study team can help you to liaise, what experience do they have with, working with the FDA, if it's, if it's going to be regulated by the FDA or NIH or Department of Defense or other people that might be funding or overseeing your study. You need to understand, are you using a central or a local IRB, and who will help you liaise with, whether you're using a commercial IRB or your own institutional IRB, who can help you with liaising with them. The same thing with contracts and budgets, both with your sites and your vendors, who at your institution, typically someone in your finance group or your grants administration will help you with all of those pieces and processes. So that's really your core project team. Now I'm going to just talk a little bit, just briefly, on all of the different members and groups that they liaise with. So the steering committee, and as I said, many of the steering committee members are going to be part of your core project team. They help you with study design. They think about sort of the ethical conduct of the study. They really are looking at safety. They want to look at, when you have an amendment, does this make sense? Look at it from a broader perspective. They can help you in creating things like policies, like conflict of interest or publication policies. They can help you troubleshoot if there are problems at a particular site with implementing the protocol. It just gives you a place to go and really get expert advice. So your steering committee is really an important group of people. The other people are consultants and DSMBs and safety. And I know I talked a little bit about this earlier, but the safety management of a study is really important, especially if you're using an interventional drug. This is typically an independent group. You have both either an independent medical monitor or a safety monitor. NIH has very specific definitions of these. They have specific guidelines for your medical monitor. The same thing for the DSMB, and the DSMB will also, oversee safety. Again, when you need these different groups, it will be determined both by, your IRB, the FDA, your funding agency. They make some of the decisions here and help guide you to determine how much oversight you need for safety. A DSMB typically has 3 to 7 individuals on it, depending on the trial complexity. If you're doing it through the NIH, through NINDS, they have very specific guidelines here. If you're creating your own, you want to have 1 or more biostatisticians always on the DSMB, some clinical expertise. So someone who has expertise in the disease or the patient population. Sometimes, you want someone who understands methodology of clinical trials. You might need specific clinicians if there's a specific safety outcome that you're looking at, whether it be outside of your fields. So it's important to have someone like that on the DSMB so they can review those types of events. Sometimes a bioethicist or a patient advocate is really great to have on your DSMB as well. And then you can also add, different specialists as non-voting members if different topics come up as well. The medical monitor, again, should be a physician who's sort of experienced and well-respected, understands the disease, understands the management, understands something about, the patient population, so the general course of the disease. They typically review serious adverse events in real time and adverse events, more periodically. They can talk to your individual sites about, decision-making having to do with the drug. Does the drug dose need to be changed or withheld for any reason? If there are serious adverse events, they talk through some of those events with the physicians as well. They also answer trial-related questions, not on how to manage a participant necessarily, but if it has anything to do with the trial or the patient's eligibility for the trial, the medical monitor really is the key liaison there to speak to your sites. Speaking of sites, so it's important to think about site selection. So, what you have to think, if you're managing a multi-center study, you have to, you know how many patients that you need to be enrolled because you've done that up front with your biostatistician to plan your study, thinking about within a targeted period of time and within a specific budget, you need to enroll, say, 300 patients. how many sites do you think you need to have participate in your study in order to meet that target of 300 patients, say, enrolled in a 12-month period? It's really important for you to look at that and make some determinations. And part of that is doing feasibility at the sites. So asking the sites that you're interested in collaborating with, how many patients they follow on an annual basis. Do they have the equipment available? Do they have interest in participating in the study? Do they have staff available? What is their timeline for executing contracts? What is their timeline for getting through IRB approvals? When you're choosing sites, I try to say, don't just choose your friends. You actually want to choose people who are geographically in a diverse area. Typically, if you have 10 sites, you don't want them all necessarily in the northeast or the southwest. You want to geographically disperse that if possible. And we typically have a few backup sites, so that if one of the sites decides they can't participate, we also will always have backup sites available. Funding is key. Obviously, you need to have funding before you can get moving with anything. So there's lots of opportunities for applying for funding. Make sure you're contacting any funding agencies well in advance of any grant submission deadlines. And also recognize that most of these agencies and funding groups will ask for continual updates on study progress, whether that be annually or more frequently, both on the progress of the study as well as the finances. So you need to have someone on your team, like someone in your grant administration or finance group, that is paying attention to that and can answer it, can schedule those reviews and get them done on time. Vendors, you have many different vendors. So there may be vendors for, say, getting the drug, obtaining the drug or the device that you're testing. It's important to establish that very early on as to where you're going to get your drug and then matching placebo. A central pharmacy, again, who's going to take the drug in, who's going to label that drug and then distribute it to your multiple sites. If that's part of your study, that's an important piece. If you're tracking samples, or if it's a PK study, for example, you need to have, a lab that's going to supply the kits, a central lab, or could be done locally, but it's typically done centrally, a central repository of where all those samples will go, a way to track all those samples to make sure that you have them, because again, you don't want to get to the end of the study and realize that those are sitting in multiple freezers. If there's specific equipment, you may need to have an outside vendor. So for instance, there are a lot of outcome measures that are being done remotely now. So we in the ALS world are now looking at doing things like tracking breathing through a home spirometer, and so we're using a different vendor for that. So thinking about who all might have the equipment that you need to conduct the study and contracting with those vendors, and then again remembering someone on your team, and this is typically somewhere between your grant administrator or your finance person and someone in sort of project management. It needs to oversee those vendors. They need to make sure that if we asked for 50 spirometers to be sent, that 50 were sent, and then we pay them if we received 50. So making sure that we track all of those things and manage those vendors. So the overall guiding principle I just want to leave you all with today is, whenever you're managing a trial, the most important piece is having a great team and building a team to help you, because you guys are doing fantastic work, but you can't do all of it, and you have to really be able to delegate to the appropriate people who have great training and experience to do that. And with that, I'll end with just my contact information and open up to any questions. And I think Michelle, you can help me. I think people can write questions in the chat, or there's a question and answer box, or maybe they can be unmuted.
Okay, yeah, it looks like if anybody has a question, yeah, either put it in the chat. There's a Q&A section, and I believe you are all unmuted to be able to ask, so.
I think only the panelists can talk, and I have a pretty bad internet here, but I do really want to thank you, Marianne, for going through this. It's a whirlwind. Oh, Dr. Leiden had the question that I was going to ask. I would broaden it even to for like first time investigators make. What is the biggest mistake you see first time investigators make? And then I would say, what's the biggest mistake you see first time sponsor investigators make?
Great question. And Pat Lyden, nice to hear from you. So thank you. So I would say the biggest mistake first time investigators make is they think they can do everything. They think they don't need a project manager or a coordinator. And they try to take on all of the activities. So I think that's the first. I think the other really big mistake that they often do, and I think this answers your question as well, is they under budget. People tend to not budget for all of the expertise they're going to need. So I think that budgeting is one of the key things that people tend to think, oh, I don't need a grant manager. I can just do that myself. And I've seen firsthand that turns into a mess.
Yeah, I think one of the, I don't know if this is going to work, if there's going to be enough bandwidth to put my face on here, but I think one of the challenges is there's always this balance between the fixed ongoing cost of the trial. You want to make sure your money doesn't run out before the end, but you have to continue to pay people. On the other hand, you need to preserve the money for the per subject payments, I guess, so that there's an incentive to run dry until you're sure things are going. What are some ways to I sort of plan for success there in terms of, balancing, and this applies whether you're a site investigator in a clinical trial and you need to kind of ramp up your resources, you're doing a small trial or you're doing a large trial. What's a good way to sort of forecast and get to that Goldilocks spot of, not too hard, but enough help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think, one is using the networks, because I think all of the networks that, budget for infrastructure. And so they can provide you with a lot of resources up front. I know all of the networks do that. And that sort of happens before you even get funded. So I think that's one piece of it. If you're an investigator outside of the networks and you're doing something, one would be, really pairing with other investigators at your institution. Thinking about, a sharing of coordinators, or again, if you can't afford a full-time coordinator and you're sharing them with someone and they're a more junior person, again, because of your budget, making sure you find mentors. I think the most important piece is having people at your institution, I'm sure that you have more seasoned, investigators who have been around for a long time and may have someone who's worked with them for the last 10 years, reaching out to those people and saying, hey, can my coordinator meet with your person one time a month? Just to get some insight, just to really be mentored by that person. That can really help, because there are hurdles that people who have been doing this for a long time don't even think to mention. But if you come to, I can tell you, because I have this experience. I have somebody I'm mentoring right now who's a relatively new project manager, and she comes to me with things, and I think, oh no, wait a minute, I already have a checklist like that. I already have materials for you. I wouldn't have thought to provide that up front, but here I can give you all of this. Or it's so easy once a month when I meet with her to be able to just provide that guidance. And people are willing to do that all the time. So you don't necessarily need to hire someone who has 10 years of experience, but you just need to find the people at the institution who can give them that mentorship.
I think that is that resonates on multiple levels, because I think a lot of it is, if you have the right sort of contacts, even if you're having brief meetings with a higher level mentor, in 5 minutes, sometimes they can diagnose your problem that if you go about trying to figure it out yourself, it could take you 10 hours to sort out. And they'll say, oh no, you just call so-and-so, and they just, they make your parking pass work. And you're like,
right.
Oh, so I think a lot of that is, both, on both sort of levels, like, if you have a project manager or research staff, making sure that you're having routine check-ins with them so that they're not getting, this idea of the team. Lots of people who are going off and doing things independently towards a common goal, very, very resonant in that. But you need to check in with them continually to make sure they're not, off the road somewhere and just, trying to get the car back on the road without the tow truck.
Absolutely. And ask for help. I think that's the other piece, really, is always being willing to ask for help, because I think there's a lot of people that want to provide help.
Well, with that, I think, again, Michelle can repost, although I think most people have been here, the evaluation link. I really do want to thank Marianne for taking the time to be with us here today. And again, thank you all for your attention. And the next one will be in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.